Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. I'm Ian Bailey, a staff reporter with the Globe and Mail in Ottawa. Pleased to be your host and moderator today. We have a great discussion ahead, but first I'd like to go through a few housekeeping notes related to the language selection and support during this presentation. To switch to English or French, please use the button on the upper left part of your screen as shown in the slide here. As we go along, please feel welcome to add comments and questions for today's speakers. An excellent gathering of folks using the live Q&A button on the upper right of your screen, as shown here. Now, if you're having audio issues or any other technical problem, please see the purple button labeled support chat that is, in the lower left of your screen, as shown here. On the same screen, we also have identified how you can turn on captions. It's the three little vertical buttons on the lower right of your video player. Now, at the end of the webcast, you're going to see a QR code. Please click or take a picture of it to fill out our survey so we can continue to improve your experience with our events. Now that we're through those points, it's time to get started. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Globe and Mail's headquarters are situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. My colleagues and I are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and for the guidance of Indigenous leaders on issues of national importance, such as the topic we're going to be addressing today. And we're pleased to have such a leader here today to honor us with an opening and closing ceremony. I'd like to welcome Bob Watts, reconciliation practitioner with the First Peoples Group. Mr. Watts is from the Mohawk and Ojibwe nations and resides at the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario. Among numerous other roles and leadership positions, he was the interim executive director of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which examined and made recommendations regarding Indian residential school era and its legacy. Welcome, Mr. Watts.
Thank you very much, Miigwech, for that introduction. It's a real honor to be here with all of you. Kanoshawakke Megazi Indigenous Makwadotum. So my name and my language is Tall Pine, and my clan is a Bear Clan. And I've got a little smudge going here. Oftentimes when we start meetings, especially something as significant as this, we ask for help. We ask for divine guidance, and we try to create a really positive atmosphere for us to be able to tackle these tough challenges that we have before us. And so we use medicine. This is sage. So I'm going to send this sage out to all of you. If we were sitting together in circle, this sage would come around and you would pull that smoke up over your head. So you bring your very best thoughts to bear on the work that needs to happen. And then you'd pull it up over your eyes. So you try to see the very, very best in each other, and over your ears. So you'd be attentive and listen for those good messages that are being spoken of, and over your mouth. So you'd speak the very best words that you have, and over your heart. So you'd bring your heart to bear on all that work that's being done and the words that you need to say. And so we'd ask for help from our ancestors. And I think in the work that's being done here, our ancestors have been through so much of the things that we're going to talk about, and they're anxious to help us. And so we ask for the help from our ancestors, and we think about the future generations too, that work that we need to do to create that positive world, that wonderful experience for our children and our grandchildren and all those 7 generations to come. One of the things that I would offer from our own traditions, and I think it's significant that we think about what are some of the Indigenous wisdom, the wisdom that's been part of this land, that's been part of this territory that we all share and call home, that might help us and to think through some of the tough issues. And the one thing I think about are the 7 grandfather teachings. So I'll just name them because I think they're all important and they all can work together. Wisdom, bravery, honesty, love, respect, humility, and truth. So in our teachings, these are all things that we should be taking into account in terms of decisions that we need to make and plans that we need to develop, that all of these values and principles can help us make the very, very best decisions that we can make for the time that we're living in and for future generations. That question to me is really one of the central questions that we think about and that I would offer that we might want to consider is what future are we helping to build for our children and our grandchildren? And if there's nothing else that any of us have in common, I think it's that idea that we all want something better for our kids and our grandkids and all those future generations. And so it's in our hands to help to create that better future. And I wanted to close this part by letting you know I have a fire going here. And oftentimes when we gather around that fire because it's part of community. And that fire helps to give us light, it helps to give us warmth, but it's also there that if there's things that aren't serving you well, or there's things that you need to set aside, that you would put that in the fire. Ask the fire to take care of that for you if it's no longer serving you well. So that fire is going to be lit for this entire meeting. And so I offer that to all of you as something that is part of our community that we're forming here that can help all of us. I want to just close with this quote that I found about thinking through plans because of the learning that we're doing, the idea that we're on this iterative community process. And what it says is that we need to cultivate an atmosphere that encourages all of us to be methodical, but not rigid, to be creative, but not haphazard, decisive, but not hasty, careful, but not controlling, recognizing that in the final analysis, it is not technique, but unity of thought, consistent action, and dedication to learning that will bring about progress. So I offer that to you. I offer this ceremony and this medicine to all of you to help us in the work that we're all jointly engaged in terms of creating that better future for all of our children. So with that, I just say Chimigwech and Yawagoa and look forward to hearing from all of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. We look forward to seeing you again at the end of the webcast. And now, panel discussion on hate crimes in Canada. This is an urgent issue. It's one that requires timely solutions. There's a sobering statistic. Statistics Canada says that police-reported hate crimes have increased every single year from 2019 to 2023, with the number of reported hate crimes in 2023 more than double the number in 2019. Race and ethnicity are the leading driver of hate crimes. And we know that many of these crimes go unreported. People don't report them. They aren't counted as statistics. And so the actual prevalence, the actual number of incidents in Canada is probably much, much higher than these alarming statistics. So we have a esteemed group of leaders here to talk about this issue, the impacts on our communities, and potential solutions. And I'm honored to introduce our participants today. Samia Hassan is the Executive Director of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. Welcome to Samia. Mariam Moose is a Policy and Research Analyst with the Office of the Federal Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime, and we appreciate Mariam joining us. Bernie Farber is the founding chair of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Welcome to Bernie. And Craig Upshaw is a retired detective constable with the Halifax Regional Police. Welcome to everyone. Let's start our discussion. Craig, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a bit about the work you have done and your background, your professional background?
Absolutely. I was with Halifax Regional Police for about 23 years. Prior to that, I specialized in Indigenous community and incarcerated youth. And then I was also one of the founding creators for the hate crime unit that required a ton of research, which I spent a lot of time in Ontario because there was more files to learn from in Ontario. So the members in Ontario were excellent people that shut down their units and taught me every step of the way. Every time I had to go up there, they've always treated me well and provided a ton of training in this area, as well as Canadian Race Relations Federation, as well as OPC. There was a ton of learning courses. The HICIT group, which is a hate crime extremism investigative team. There's a lot of learning that had to go on, and then we had to take that back to Nova Scotia and break all the information apart to make it work for our communities, and then inject that with the community engagement piece to make it work for our people.
Right, Craig. Ahead of this gathering today, we spoke earlier about an example of a common hate crime and impacts on community, and we talked about hate graffiti. I wonder if you could tell us, hypothetically, about an incident of this kind of hate crime and how it would be investigated, what the process would be for dealing with this kind of incident.
Well, firstly, one of the things we consider, we've trained all the members here actually to understand a little bit more on hate. Education is a huge piece. So a lot of the calls that you would receive is like you've got a Jewish community. A call comes in. There's a swastika on a bench. So the first things that happen is our first responders are always going to be police officers coming in that are on the street. So they're going to come in, they're going to look at the file, and they're going to hit a study flag that says this is hate related, uh, a motivated hate crime. So that would come to my unit. And when I was in that unit, I would look at the file to make sure, firstly, everything was done in regards there. But when the member goes there, our job is to capture for evidence that actual information. And when we capture that information, you need to get it removed immediately because we don't want to re-traumatize the community. We don't want someone else to make another call and keep affecting and causing trauma in the community. So our job is to remove that immediately. Then you have to gather your obviously your witnesses. Who saw it? Was there video cameras around? What time of day did this happen? Um, this is important for us to move on to start building these files and start seeing there's an ongoing problem. So once that file came in and we captured it, we're going to try to find it if we have a suspect. And you also got to make sure the whole time that your person that was victimized is okay, how they're feeling. Are we providing a service for them? Do they need victim services? Is there somebody in the community organizations that can help support our victims? Once we get there, if we identify somebody, we're going to start building that hate motivated file. And how that works is you would charge with mischief and add a 718.2, which is a hate motivation into the court. Then we'd submit that file into court. But you also have to consider the reassurance piece for that community as well as the victimized person and make sure we provide resources there if they have their own resources to make sure the community's well and they feel safe.
If you don't make an arrest, if you don't find someone, is there what happens to that incident? How is the information about that kind of incident used by police? What happens to it?
So you're going to capture that information, and when you're tracking the information, the importance of reporting that type of information to police, even if we can identify somebody, is it's allowing me to build a network of files to say this happened this date, this date, this date at the same location. So now we know there's a targeted group in that area, that this is happening between these hours. So maybe we have to put surveillance in that area at that time, or make sure my members are uh, doing the reports in that area to make sure that we make our community feel safe. So the information that comes in is taken to build um, all the files for us to have that information as well. So if you've got an area where it's all around, there's a good possibility that your suspect you're hunting for is probably in the middle somewhere there. So the importance of calling is for us or reporting this is for us to actually know that okay, this is an ongoing problem in this area. This group has been targeted. And eventually, if you put all the files together with just different pieces of information, can actually help us identify somebody that we may be able to take care of that problem, make the community feel safe. And if we can't, we still got to provide resources to make sure the community feels safe and they're comfortable contacting us to say, you know what, I received the proper service and they really care and they've taken this serious.
Thank you. Mariam, I'd like to bring you in next. You work for the Office of the Federal Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime. For those who are watching now who may not be familiar, could you tell us a little bit about the office and the work it does?
Yeah, for sure. So, our office, we're an ombuds office. We are part of the Department of Justice Canada, but we work at arm's length. And victims and survivors of crime across Canada can contact us to either submit a complaint against any federal organization whereas they believe that their rights have not been respected under the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights. So the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights provides victims and survivors with the right to information, protection, restitution, and participation, and also the right to form a complaint. So the majority of the complaints that we receive and that we can engage with and find resolution uh, revolve around victims where there's an offender involved and they're serving time at a federal institution. So, for example, a victim is not informed about a transfer from one prison institution to another, or um, their safety concerns were not taken into consideration. Then we work with those federal agencies like Corrections Canada, Pro Board Canada to try to find resolution. And on the other hand, victims and survivors contact us every single day to just know about what services are available, whether it be local victim services, whether it be housing, whether it be financial supports. Every single day we get those contacts. And then on the flip side, on the policy side, we work to identify like systemic issues that impact victims and survivors. So hate crime and access to justice is one of them, which is why we recently did a report on that. So we often chime in and provide a victim's lens to criminal justice issues that may impact victims and survivors.
Now, referring to that report, I understand it's called Strengthening Access to Justice for Victims of Hate Crimes in Canada, and we're going to include a link to that report in the email going out to the audience after this event. But could you tell us why the report was produced and what the goal was for doing the report?
Yeah, so we started to hear from a few stakeholders about the increase in hate crimes across Canada. I mean, it's in the news as well. So we wanted to look at systemically, like what are some things that need to change, and as well, while we started to do our investigation and our research, there was there was Bill C-63, the online harms bill that was released. So we used that as an opportunity as well to get feedback from police services across Canada and victim services to understand a bit more what are their thoughts around um, the different proposals within that proposed legislation, and also just what are the gaps and what are their experiences on the ground. So.
Are there any key findings in the report you can tell us about?
Well, from the police services that respond to us, it's no surprise that there is not a lot. There's a lack in specialized hate crime units across Canada, and um, I think it's 70% that police services that responded, police officers that responded stated that they did not have a hate crime unit. But I don't necessarily think that there needs to be a hate crime unit in every single police service across Canada. Some police services are a bit smaller, so there's no need for that. But they also noted as well, like difficulties when it comes to identifying hate crimes, defining it, and as well with the resources. Limiting resources from victim service organizations was a big finding in that study. And also, our study estimated that only 35% of victims access the support services that they need, according to what police respondents let us know. And in previous work that I did with Ottawa Victim Services, where we worked to, it was a small project, and we worked to try to increase access to victims of hate because the rates of police reported hate crimes were so high, but the number of victims that were accessing supports at Ottawa Victim Service was very low. So why was there such a big gap? And we found that most people didn't know that these services existed. And even if they did know, they didn't see themselves represented there. They didn't see themselves sometimes represented as seen as a victim of crime. So uh, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, what are the concerns about victims not accessing victim services in your view?
Um, well, when you're a victim of hate crime is a bit different because you're being targeted for oftentimes for who you are, right? Like your identity and your race, your religion, and these are things that you can't change or are not willing to change. So, um, at the immediate aftermath of that, if they're a, a victim may want to access the supports, they might not want to, but it is their choice at the end of the day, and the harms that's there is that the victims that do need it and do want it, um, it could hinder their coping and their healing journey if they don't know that these services existed, um, or if they can't access them.
Samia, I'll turn to you next. Hate crimes are a concerning issue in the South Asian community, particularly in the last year. Can you tell me what are you observing and what are some of the drivers of these issues?
Thank you, Ian, for that question. We've been doing anti-hate work for the last 6 years, I would say. But this phenomenon, and I think in this country, we have this tendency to scapegoat different marginalized communities based on what's convenient for us at that time. So unfortunately, what's been happening within the South Asian communities as of the last, I would say, year and a half, is that there's been a lot of scapegoating for a lot of our problems, whether it's the housing crisis, whether it's the economic crisis, whether it's the rate of inflation, the cost of living. So a lot of that blame is being shifted to immigrants and refugees, international students, and there's been a lot of rhetoric around kind of putting in restrictions for immigration, restrictions for international students, and that has led communities to start to blame, particularly South Asian communities, for a lot of the problems that they're facing. Um, and the way that it works is a lot of international students that are coming into Canada are from South Asian countries, particularly from India. And so, it doesn't really say on our forehead that we were an international student, right? So you see a brown person and your hate is targeted towards them, whether or not, they belong to the international student community. So there have been a lot of interpersonal hate crimes where people have been practicing hate speech. There's been assaults towards younger South Asian people. People are, caught spitting on South Asian communities on the street. There's been a lot of online hate targeted towards South Asian communities as well. So it's been a whole gamut of um, just targets towards the communities, in particularly with the international students. That is a more of a serious concern for us as an organization because these are young people that are here without their families. First, they're here and they're being exploited by the institutions, by the post-secondary institutions. They're being exploited by their employers. They're being exploited by the government for their money. And then now they're, survivors of hate crimes wherever they go. And just a trigger warning, unfortunately, we have been seeing in Ontario and in other provinces the suicide rate exponentially increase within the international student community as a result. So it's been a very, very challenging year and a half for this community.
Oh, it's very concerning and very unfortunate to hear about that. What kind of supports exist for the victims who are facing this kind of hate?
So as Maria mentioned, unfortunately, even if there are support services for survivors and victims, people often do not know that they exist. They often don't relate to the people that work there. They often don't feel comfortable to take on those services or to utilize those services. And for a lot of youth, it's challenging for them to even process what has happened to them. So that entire phase of experiencing a hate crime, and as Miriam said, it's a very unique form of crime where you're being targeted for your identity, right? In the case of South Asians, it's usually when people see the color of your skin is brown, and you're being targeted for that. It's not something that you can change. So it does have a very difficult and challenging impact on those communities. So that process of even trying to understand what has happened to them, impacts their mental health, impacts their well-being, and it debilitates them in one way, and makes it very challenging for them to seek out services. In terms of the youth, and particularly international students, there isn't many support services for them right now. There aren't any that I know of, support services that are targeted towards international students. So what is happening is organizations that serve South Asian communities are taking it upon themselves to do some of that support work. So the organizations that already have the trust and connection with those communities are looking into ways to supporting them, like on the side of their table, even though it's not something that they are funded to do, it's not something that they have resources to do, but just because the situation is so grave, people are doing within the community whatever they can to support them.
And how is that working out, that community action to try and deal with this?
It's been challenging. So obviously, when you're required to support survivors and victims, there are resources that you need, there are connections that you need, and then you have to have a tailored approach, because the way that hate crimes impact each individual is very different. And so if you don't have the right people that have the right training to do that support work, it could result in further negative outcomes for that person. So, again, they're doing their best to connect them to services, to do counseling with them, and provide them whatever resources that's available. But again, there's not a lot of concentrated funding from government to support these victims right now.
Thank you. Mr. Farber, the Jewish community is seeing a significant rise in anti-Semitism based on what's going on in the Middle East. Could you tell us about what Canada's Jewish communities are currently going through in these regards?
Um, there's a very, excuse me, well-known historian by the name of Robert Wistrick. Robert Wistrick once described Semitism as the longest hatred. And so we have been dealing with hate for literally for centuries. Um, Basically, what has happened is, of course, over the course of decades, Jews have always been on the move. You know, you talk about the musical Fiddler on the Roof, and they ask the question, why is it that the Jewish person in that particular musical is shown with a fiddle? Well, a fiddle you can always just pack easily and be able to move. And this is what has happened primarily with the Jewish community over the centuries. They have moved from Eastern Europe, where pogroms and attacks on communities, leading eventually to the tragedy of the Holocaust, where 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were murdered. They ended up coming to what they thought was the Golden Land, known as the United States and Canada, and yet hate followed them here as well. And it's become an issue that many of us in the community have had to struggle with. Um, the sad part of it, of course, is that even though we see hatred here in Canada and in the United States, where there has been hatred as well, has emanated as a result of a political issues that have developed over centuries, stemming from the Middle East, and issues dealing between Jews and Muslims and Christians and others. There's always history that impacts hatred. And so we have a long way to go in terms of trying to find ways of working together. It's not just a matter of, A and B or black and white. It's really a matter of all of us finding ways to work together in order to deal with this properly.
We know a lot of these incidents are taking place in schools. Are you able to say what's happening there?
Well, the schools are of course, almost a petri dish, if you will, for the development of hatred. And a lot of it, of course, has to do with the fact that young children are just not primed enough to understand the differences between good and bad and love and hate. It's really within the schools that teachers have a prime role, I believe. And that prime role is to educate the students as to the dangers of hatred. What happens very often, unfortunately, is that even teachers within the public school system have not received the proper training in terms of how to deal with hatred in the classroom. One of the other panelists had mentioned the idea, I think it was Craig, of swastikas that are scratched onto benches, in the public fare. Well, in public schools, we often see swastikas as a way of attacking or confronting Jews and causing lots of of concern within the classroom itself. But once you have a chance to explain to children what a swastika represents, what a swastika means, and also understanding, of course, the fact that there is a long history of the swastika being used in Eastern traditions for good, and that it was in fact the Nazi regime that stole the swastika, and of course, from there the swastika was the preeminent sign of evil. And so, two things have to occur, as far as I am concerned. One, you have to ensure that teachers are properly trained in terms of how to identify hatred, how to identify certain aspects of hatred, so that they are able to deal with it in the classroom. But secondly, children. Um, Teachers again have the honor, if you will, of having our children for a good part of the day, and we trust them to help in terms of developing programs to teach about how to deal with hatred in the classroom. But teachers have to be trained as well, and from what I can see, there has been a lack of training within school boards right across the country. And I think we're going to have to redefine and re-understand, if you will, how to bring these kinds of teachings into the classroom itself.
What has to happen to sort of have that shift so that teachers um, understand and are better have a better understanding of dealing with these issues?
Well, the shift is that there has to be compulsory training. Very often we have found that when we do, for example, my colleague of mine, Len Rudner, and I have been doing anti-Semitism training in high schools for teachers across the country. And these are catch if catch can, so to speak. If teachers have the time, they come to it. My view is that this has to be as compulsory for teachers to learn about the dangers of hatred and how to deal with it, and no matter where this occurs, money has to be put into teaching and into the processes of having teachers be on the front line of teaching our children.
Another issue, we know that most hate crimes go unreported. People suffer they suffer in kind of silence. Mr. Farber, why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for this, Ian. Firstly, I think we have to understand that a lot of the hatred that is perpetrated on newcomers to Canada, and many of these newcomers and immigrants and refugees that come here come from lands that have not particularly been how shall we say this, where the uniform has not been particularly honorable, where police have not done always the right thing, and so many are afraid to actually break their concerns, to the attention of police. So there has to be work done within various different kinds of communities to ensure that there is a comfortable way of them approaching and reporting hate crimes. Now to report a hate crime, very often you have to go into a police station. You have to sit down, usually in a cold, dank room. You've already been targeted for hate, so you're already a victim. So there is, I think, a real lack of understanding here in society in terms of the fear that people have of reporting hate crimes, and so they let them go. This is where I think police have to play a very much an important role, and so does the Crown. The idea of reporting a hate crime, it doesn't just end there. The police have to do the investigation. Sometimes they have to go into the communities where police aren't particularly respected, and sometimes they have to ask some very tough questions. I think that there has to be an understanding brought between police, communities, the Crown, prosecutors. There has to be, I think, a real step forward and lots of resources, both from the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal government. Very often we don't work together, and so there is we go around kind of chasing our feathers. We have to be much better than that. We really have to basically understand what's going on in various communities and the fear there is in terms of reporting these crimes.
Craig, Mr. Upshaw, what do you think about these matters as someone who's worked as a police officer?
Well, you know what, Mr. Farber's definitely hit the education piece. There's a lot of need for the education piece. It's underreported because lack of trust. And in order to get trust in the community, we got to start building that relationship, building that bridge to get that trust back. And we have to. There should be nothing for us without us. We should not be a subject of a conversation at a table. We need to have a seat at that table to have the conversation in different communities. So, in order to build the proper education, the proper programming, we need to have a partnership with the community, not just telling them what we're going to do. So we need to change how we do things. I certainly agree. And when we built the hate crime unit, that's what we did. We took a lot of engagement pieces from the community to build it. The reassurance piece is huge. Certain cultures, it's embarrassment to deal with the police. There's lack of trust in the police. There's a lot of things that we have to actually not taking the community serious. If we're walking there and that's what we're displaying, why would you call? There's nothing going to be done. We need to make sure we give voices back to our community, start building that relationship, to start moving forward, to actually having those calls. You see an increase in your stats. The stats are up for one reason, in Halifax in particular. The fact is that it's starting to be reported. Um, we've trained at that point. The members have all been trained, so that's paying attention. We're actually putting study flags on stuff to track the actual hatred. So you can see an increase in numbers. Has a hatred increased during that time? I will say no. It's just now starting to be captured. But with the world events and everything that's going on, yes, the hatred is coming up in particular groups because there's something that's causing that, and we got to start doing the education piece and getting back at that. Um, we need to give our victimized people a voice. We need to sit down and you listen. We need to we need to offer the services, training victim services. We need to find out what community partnerships are offering the supports, like such as ISIN and so on. Can we get together to do newcomers? We've done newcomers conversations, what to expect when you're moving here, because when the government has sent immigrants here at one point, there was no training provided. So all of a sudden they're coming into our communities, and the communities are saying, we're not used to this. And the people coming are saying, well, we're not used to this either. So now we're starting to respond to those calls that that could have been avoided had we provided the proper training coming in. And that was where we started doing the newcomers meeting. We're sitting there explaining, know your rights, what to expect when you see police. Um, when you have a call that you put in police, what do you expect from that call? What happens after you make that original call? And providing many files with the reassurance pieces the way we need to go. Every file gonna start having some reassurance. Are you okay? What can I do to work with you to make this better? Not, this is what I'm going to do. What can I do to work with you to make this better? What are the community needs? If you got the community relationships and you're there, then you're going to actually start hearing what the problems are and the needs are in the community. We can start addressing that.
Miss Muse, you were in a position yourself last year when you were victimized by a hate crime. I don't want to ask you to share anything you aren't comfortable with, but is there anything you can share about your decision to report and the process you went through?
Yeah, for sure. So, last year around this time, in January 2024, when I was traveling to London, Ontario, to listen into the sentencing hearing um, uh, of, uh, of a man that did a horrible crime to the Afsal family, and it was part of our work on engaging with victims and survivors of crime and hearing firsthand from the victim impact statements and the community impact statements. And at that time, the night before the sentencing hearing, just taking a walk, and a group of men in a car, somebody hurled out like an Islamophobic, racist remark and threw a bottle at me. It didn't hit me, but um, I was very shooken up. It was nighttime, and I went back to my hotel, and I really didn't want to report. Although I know the benefits of reporting, I preach about it all the time. Better collection of data, better representation. Um, but I was tired. I was shook, and I'm not in a city that like that's familiar to me. So, um, anyways, I went to the police station to file a police report and drove over there, and my situation in the incident was not taken seriously. I felt like I was a bother. I felt like it was burdensome. I experienced feelings of self victim blaming, like I should have done a better job capturing more details of the license plate number, all these things that you think that you should have done. Um, Although I know with my background that it's normal to not remember when you're dealing with trauma. It's normal um, to experience those feelings, and uh, the experience that I had with the police officer wasn't the greatest. Um, and it was only towards the end when I kept pushing that, I do want to file a report and I want this to be included in your stats and your numbers, and that, it's just ironic the reason why I'm here is for to attend and participate in the sentencing hearing. And this is what happens to me. And this is why reporting hate is the rates of reporting is not high. And this is a perfect example of like barriers that victims and survivors experience. So how can I knowingly and confidently preach to people that like we need to report when I myself has experienced this? Um, the later that night, another police officer actually came to my hotel to take my statement, and I had a great experience with him. Although I don't know if I hadn't informed them of, the reason why I was there and my role. That I don't know. I don't think that somebody would have came. And at this point, there is resolution. I really appreciate what Greg mentioned about um, building a case and the reason for reporting, because I never thought about it like that. I thought about it like, okay, let's just report for stats. Um, but right before releasing our special report, we met with the chief of police from London, Ontario, and he mentioned the same thing, that it's very very valuable because you're able to build those small pieces, um, and hopefully make a case. So the number of victims and survivors who do report is so low, and police really need to take accountability and really need to ensure that when somebody does come forward, that they're receiving a trauma informed approach, that they're being heard, that they're being listened to. It doesn't matter if, the chances or likelihood of catching this person are very, very slim. Victims want to be heard, they want to be understood, um, and they want information. So, the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights provides victims with the right to information about the progress of the investigation. And although that right is upon request, so you need to ask for it, you need to know to ask for it. But even for myself, knowing that I have that right and asking for that, I did not get any updates, really. Even if it's an update about victims want even just a small update, like, we're still working on it, or your file is still open, or it's closed, or, we still don't have an update. Um, any information is information. So,
I'm very sorry that you had to go through this. Is there any advice you would offer to someone who is going to be victimized tomorrow, next week, next month, someone who finds themselves in that moment that you went through?
um, some advice is that, especially when it comes to hate, like, um, this is not a problem that's like within yourself. That's something that you need to change. Your identity is who you are. It makes you you. And yeah, like it's a horrible experience that there's people out there that have these beliefs, different beliefs, or that have anger or hatred that is oftentimes misfounded. But um, you shouldn't look towards changing yourself. Um, and when it comes to reporting, uh, you know, I'm not going to. I'll still advocate for people to report, but you really need to take into consideration like what is your state at the time and what is your well being and how could that impact you, because as much as I would like to say that, I hope that you'll have a positive experience. I can't guarantee that, and I don't want to re-traumatize people. going through the criminal justice system. So if you are going to report, and it might be a sensitive time, or you need support, bring a friend with you, bring a family member. Go to your local victim services. Just Google victim services in the city and ask them if they can help you file a police report. See if you can file a police report online. Some police services allow you to file a police report for hate crimes online. So try to find that support if you need it, and try to just be uh, realistic, I guess, a bit with the outcome, and take care of yourself first.
Thank you. Craig, I believe we talked about this as well. Craig, what can victims of these kinds of incidents do to, after the incident has happened, if they've been victimized, to sort of help police who may end up investigating these matters?
Well, one of the things I've always suggested, and I mean, obviously, Miriam made some really key points. And I'm just going to touch on that briefly before I move to the questions. The fact is that a lot of police agencies haven't been trained. We are working to try to change them. That's what I'm doing now in my retirement, is trying to train police officers. So when Miriam says this is an issue, this is absolutely an issue. Is training our police agencies to get up to this, to be able to investigate hate, how to provide support to our victims, and even how to speak with our victims, and relate and build those community engagements. So there's a lot of things that are lacking that we're working on. Um, First thing I've always told, that I always tell people, is to make sure, the first and foremost, make sure you are safe. Make sure you make yourself safe. If that means that you got to leave, leave. Do not stand there with somebody practicing hatred on you and start yelling back and forth, because all that's going to do for you at this point is going to elevate that situation to maybe turn it to something more physical, and that's not what you need. We need to make sure you're safe first. If it's immediate threat and you're in danger, 911. Um, while you're waiting for the police, if you are safe, that could be mean moving to a group. That means sometimes, it does mean yelling loud to bring attention to the situation so you have people around. But while you're waiting, obviously, you're going to want to protect the evidence. Do you have photos? Do you have video? Do you, what was being said? Um, Make sure that if you need a family member there. One of the things that we do in the unit that I created was, if you need me to come to your house, I want to make sure I'm at your house. I'm at Tim Hortons. You got your whoever you need with you to make you comfortable. A victim centric approach, which means that I'm trying to give power back to the person that was victimized. This is on your time. I need to make sure you're comfortable. So I've sit in houses where no charges could be laid, but I was there for 4 hours and 5 hours. People were crying and upset and want to leave, want to go back to the country that they left because it was war torn. But they're here because Canada stands for peace and freedom, and that's what they want to. They want to feel safe. They wanted to leave. That's how bad this event had affected their family and traumatized their family. But in 4 or 5 hours, I can't lay a charge. But just because there's nothing more important than that person to me at that point, I'm sitting there speaking. They felt better when I left. They felt like they were heard. They had a voice, and that I cared, and I absolutely do care. So there was a lot of things that just putting in that time and listening, active listening, is huge. So once you're safe and you make that call, you're going to deal with members showing up, and they're going to want to say, what happened? Are you okay? Should be the first question. Are you okay? And what happened? So now we're going to get to what happened. They're going to want to gather evidence. They want to take a statement. They want to make sure you're safe and that you got any support you need. Do you need somebody here? And then when they start taking their statements, they need to take a statement, because our first responder is always going to be the police officer on the street. And those police officers on the street are criminal investigators, to the point where they're going to show up and see if it's an assault. They're going to investigate the assault. They're going to flag that file. That file is going to come over to my office. And in my office, I'm going to look at that and make sure everything was done in that file. And then within 72 hours, I'm going to see the victim. And the reason I chose 72 hours is only because, as a police officer, you're still off work sometime. And one of the things that was said was that resources. Well, if I'm the only hate crime member, I can only come on my time, because no one else can do it. So when they say 72 hours, well, maybe I'm off for the 3 days and I'm coming back to work. That's why it was 72 hours. And I'm going to call and say, look, you know what? I'm coming to see, is there a spot we can meet and have a conversation about this? And you can have whomever you like there to make you feel comfortable. how that event make you feel. Are you okay? How does it affect your life? How does it affect your family? Is there anything I can do? Any supports that I can reach out to assist here? What can we do in this situation? And then one of the biggest things that Miriam said, it's the updates. It's not updates saying, "Hi, can I speak to you?" And that's it. How are you doing? This is Craig. It's not Detective Constable. This is Craig calling. How are you doing? And then we're going to have that conversation about how you're doing. And I'm going to update on the file that way. This has to be. This is a personal visit. It attacks the core of who we are and what we stand for. It's an attempt to dehumanize and vilify people that you work so hard to do things in your life that this really attacks the core. For some of us, it's easier to get slapped in the face for some reason, not attack the core of what we stand for. So there's a lot of pain, and I've seen that pain in those investigations, and that has to be done. How we do those investigations and how we support our victimized people. And when I say victimized people, I don't say victims because I don't want to see as hate as beating anybody. So when I say victimize, that event victimized that person, and we're going to move past this. That's why I always classify as a victimized. And I'm not sure if that fully answered your question. I hope it did. And there's
Yes.
just so much more places we could go. I just want to make sure I answered your question that you asked.
No, you did. Thank you very much. Sammy, I'd like to turn to you for a moment. Community organizations like yours provide a lot of information and support, but there are resource constraints. I wonder if you could tell me about these constraints and how you feel support services could be expanded with more people, more financial services, resources.
So I think just to backtrack a bit in terms of the reason why people don't report, and that's connected to your question about third party reporting.
Yes.
You know, there's various different reasons, and each community has a different relationship and history with law enforcement, right? And so we can't have a blanket answer. In terms of the mistrust, the distrust within certain communities, particularly Black communities, Indigenous communities, because of historical oppressions that those communities face from police services. Some communities have very good relationships with the police, and that is often reflective in the hate crime numbers that we see, the stats of police reported hate crimes. Particularly, I know it was mentioned, immigrants and newcomers. One of the facts, and I haven't seen in my experience with South Asian communities, that their perspectives of police back home will influence how they interact with police here. In fact, it's the opposite. I've seen, I think it's because of our colonial mindset from people, from my father's generation and so on. They actually revere the police. Like they will say, look at the police, they're so different here, and they idealize them. It's different from for youth that are here that actually, have more interaction with the police, so they have a different perspective. One of the things that we have ingrained in some immigrant communities is the fact that we should just be grateful to be in this country, to be allowed to be to enter this country, to live and to thrive and to work and to play here, because again, of that colonial mindset. And so when we do experience a hate crime or a hate speech, or somebody says something about our identity, our first reaction is, this is just part of the system, let it go, and just put your head down and continue to do the work that you're here to do, right? Continue, go to work, go to school, get an education, put food on the table. So people don't want to be involved in anything that will kind of rock the boat, so to speak. So I've seen that in the South Asian communities in particular. And although we're not an organization that does victim support services, we do get a lot of people from the South Asian communities that reach out to us for support and for direction on how to proceed once they have been victims of hate crimes or online hate. So in terms of resources, so generally, I think what's happening is people are not reporting to the police, and we've been trying to work with police to improve the way that they do hate crime reporting. As Maria mentioned, the system is very fragmented. The way that you experience the reporting system in one police service is very different from another. And often what we've heard is they're re-victimizing people, not, police officers not taking the victim seriously. And then also, even if they get through, the reporting process, there is, they take it seriously. At the end, the way that hate crime criminal code is structured, the threshold for what a hate crime is very, very high in our country. And so it really discourages people when they've gone through all of this. They've been re-traumatized. And then at the end of the day, the justice system just doesn't work for them, right? And so that's been a big challenge. So what we've been trying to do is push government to support organizations to help with third-party reporting. And so a lot of police services that we've been working with, including Toronto Police, Peel Police, York Region Police, Ottawa Police, they're open to third-party reporting, but there's not a lot of organizations that volunteer to do it, again, because they don't have the resources, the capacity, the knowledge, the training to do that, even though what the basic foundation of what is required for third party reporting is that trust that community organizations already have with their communities. And like I said, our organization doesn't even do frontline services, but we still get calls from victims to support them and to give them information on what they should do next once they've been victims of hate crimes or hate speech. So I think there needs to be a lot of capacity building that is needed for community-based organizations. There's really, really great ones across the country that have really good connections with communities, that do a lot of support work with communities, but they just don't have that capacity, the resources to do that. And not just, I know one of the things that we think is like provide organizations this one-time funding, give them $50,000 and all their problems should be solved. That's unfortunately when we started to do this work 6 years ago. We thought that we would see hate crime numbers reduce, and I think maybe that was something naive on my part. But unfortunately, it keeps every year. The numbers keep increasing and things get worse. And so there needs to be a dedicated effort to put in resources that are long-term, sustainable, that build capacity of organizations to support communities, because this is where a lot of victims will tend to gravitate towards as opposed to going to the police.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take a moment to remind the audience that they can type questions for the panelists using the live Q&A button in the upper right of your screen. And we're going to be taking some questions shortly. But before we do, Bernie, I wondered if you had any thoughts on what the excellent points that Samia has made on the resource issue.
Well, I've said from the very beginning that the resource issue is the key issue. I find it kind of strange, Ian, that over the many years I have been, batting my head against the wall and trying to deal with hate crimes, in this country, and we always get the same kind of rhetoric from leadership. People say, "Word, action, not words." So yes, it's very good to ensure that the right thing is said. And let me be clear. I think that when there is a hate crime, a hate propaganda that is perpetrated in Toronto, Montreal, Quebec, it doesn't matter where. It is up to the leaders to lead. Communities are looking for comfort, and so there shouldn't be any balking at this. There should be a comfort zone, so to speak. The other thing that really concerns me is, where do these resources come from? We do have resources for all kinds of things, but you rarely see within the educational divisions or within municipalities or provinces, you rarely see a sustained budget to deal with hate crimes. As a matter of fact, we have to understand that there is a difference between hate crime and hate propaganda. And hate propaganda, which is words, hateful words, is of course the most difficult one to really understand. Police, for example, get it when there's a bank robbery. You've got good guys and you've got bad guys, and you go out and you get the bad guys. But when somebody is writing dirty, racist words on a wall, and it's up to a police officer to interpret those, sadly, they don't always have the tools to do so. And so training for police officers has to be doubled, maybe even tripled, in terms of understanding this, because literally hate speech very often leads to hate crime. And we see this often, especially in the schoolyards. And that's why I get back to this, Ian. Training for teachers is the ultimate. I know of teachers that have gone through the system for 20 years and have never had one training session on how to deal with hate in the classroom. It's beginning to change, and it's changing slowly. But even within different groups, different minority groups, there is self-centered hate as well. And so this is a huge issue. And I'm not so sure that we put the right number of resources into the enormity of this issue. So we have a long way to go. Later on, I see there's a number of questions that have come up. I do want to talk a little bit about the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which I was proud to help found, which is one of the few organizations that actually tackles hate from the ground up, identifying hate groups that are out there, identifying politicians that have actually walked with hate mongers in this country, perhaps not even knowing who they are. So there's a lot of work to do, but we have resources within the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, and I'll tell your listeners right now, antihate.ca is your way to access the work that we have there. We're grateful for the resources that government provides, and so we want to make sure that we get that the resources that we have, the information we have, out into the various features, be it schools or others.
Thank you very much, Bernie. Before we go to questions, I have a question for you. We're going to go to each of the panelists, but I'll start with you, Bernie, since you're up. What needs to change in the criminal code to facilitate laying more charges, enhance the prosecution of people who perpetrate these kinds of crimes? And we're going to go to each of the panelists on this issue before we go to the questions. So, Bernie,
I'm not so sure that there needs to be understanding as opposed to change. So yes, one of your panelists had mentioned the difficulty that arises in terms of actually laying charges, and one of the most difficult things, and I'm sure Craig will understand this, that once the police have a concept that a hate crime has been committed, especially a hate propaganda crime, they then have to get the permission of the provincial attorney general in order to lay that charge. So there is a process that one goes through for hate crime that for bank robberies, for anything else, there's no such process. I mean, it's easier to lay charges on stealing a bicycle than there is on hate crime itself. So maybe we have to take a look at some of the policies that are written into the law. Does it really need the provincial attorney general's permission to go ahead and lay a charge? So there are simple things like that that have to be taken into account. Secondly, again, I go back to the need for education. You have to understand the law in order to apply the law, and the law is not difficult when it comes to hate crime. It is a criminally indictable offense to knowingly and willfully promote hatred against a person identified by race, creed, color, nationality, or sexual orientation. And it should be, I won't say easy, but there must be a way for police officers who are the first level of the approach in dealing with hate crime to understand this and bring this forward. And then we have to work cooperatively, with the Crown in order that we have a mutual understanding of what those words mean.
Miriam, I understood you want to weigh in on resources and victim compensation before we talk about the criminals.
Yeah, so just speaking to Samia's point, like where she mentioned that a lot of funding often for these for community-based agencies it's temporary, right? Like it's a project for a year maybe, or limited time funding, and we see this across a lot of community-based organizations, not only for hate but also for intimate partner violence, sexual assault, etc. And the problem with that is that oftentimes you only have enough time to really start to build the capacity and to start to build a framework. And once you start to do that, there's no more funding anymore. And the problem with that as well is if we look at victim compensation and victim programs and schemes across Canada, there's no consistency. We have eligibility requirements that are different from province to province and territories. Some provincial victim services programs will require the crime to be a violent or serious crime in order to access those compensation programs, like for let's say counseling or graffiti removal or things like that. It needs to be a violent or serious crime. Well, how do you determine a violent or serious crime? They take it from the criminal code. So does uh, uh, criminal harassment, let's say, like if somebody is yelling hateful speech to you and they want to use that criminal code offense, does that consist of a violent or serious crime? No, it doesn't in some provinces. So the whole point is that there's no consistency across the country, and for all victims and survivors of crime, there needs to be equitable access across the country to support services. You can't be a victim of a crime in Nova Scotia and be able to access XYZ, but then if you're a victim of a crime in Saskatchewan, like good luck for you. Like it's not okay. And Canada signed on to the in like the 80s, late 80s, they signed on to the UN um, Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime. And we have a mandate. We're obligated. The federal government has a responsibility to ensure that. So until we see equal access across the country, we're going to have to rely on those programs or those grants or those limited time fundings to help fill in this gap.
We have a number of questions from our audience, and so I think we're going to just pivot right over to those. I'll read the question. Here's an interesting question from a member of the audience. If the broader objective is an inclusive society, how important is the use of criminal charges versus non-legal efforts to help people see beyond stereotypes? Bernie, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, listen, I believe that the criminal law is a bit of a blunt instrument when it comes to dealing with hatred. And I agree with the person who posed this question. Are there ways outside of using the criminal law process to develop an understanding? And it's difficult, Ian. It truly is. I mean, on one side you have very little in terms of resources, save the concept of criminal law. But you do have law within human rights provisions. The problem is that sadly, governments are backing away from human rights provisions and leaving these kinds of crimes more in the laps of the police services. My view is that if we can utilize human rights organizations, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation that does excellent work in terms of putting together programming, having town halls, having discussion groups within youth coordinated activities, bringing issues to the fore in schools prior to kids getting involved with the criminal justice system. So yes, criminal law should be used when it comes to absolute necessity. But if there is a way of ensuring that there is a backup for or prior to imposing criminal law, that there are ways of education, I think that's the best way to move forward, without question.
Thank you, Bernie. Craig, we have a question about how consistent is police training across Canada? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that was something that's been out in conversation. Since I've retired, I've been actually doing police training here in Atlantic Canada. So obviously, when I'm training in Atlantic Canada, well, police training is going to be similar, but the difference is the resources again. So it's not consistent currently. Um, Again, I built this unit here, myself, Joanne Smith, Jeff Plotcher. We built this unit, so we're able to rip it apart and do a lot of things to it. But are we going to be able to do that in another spot? Well, that has to be based on their community, their cultures, their police department, how many bodies we're going to have in there. But generally speaking, how you investigate these crimes, how you provide support to your victimized people, that shouldn't change. There still should be that effort put out there. How do we make people feel comfortable speaking to police? By training our members. So parts of it could be absolutely blanket, but currently it's not. And like I said, that's something that's been in discussion for a while. So I'm hoping we get there. One of the things that I do want to mention One of the graphs that we use, hate plus crime is a hate crime. Hate minus crime is a hate incident. And using those as a standpoint until we can change some things to make hate an actual self-supporting charge. Well, that's our basis. So without a crime, we don't have anything can be motivated by hatred. Hate motivated with 718.2 added to it, and that's any assault, anything, even breaking into a property. It can be motivated by hate if hate is identified. But training does have to change, and we have to revamp our systems.
There's another question from the audience, and I'll put this out and see who wants to take it. Are the panelists concerned by how hate crimes are fueled by social media and violence in popular culture? If so, what should be done about the powerful educational forces involved? Sorry, Samia, do you want to take that question? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. And unfortunately, I think what we're seeing now on social media is, you know, taking hate speech very, very lightly. And actually, the platforms are encouraging more and more hate speech and hateful content. So the way that social media currently works is that if a user of social media is attracted to hate content, the way the social media algorithms are, they will be exposed to more hateful content. And so, yes, definitely, there's a lot of concern. A lot of the hate crimes that happen are either, the perpetrators are being educated online. They're being they're taking content that they see online, and then it translates into real life violence. So there is grave concern about what is happening in the online world and how that translates into further victimization of certain communities. Unfortunately, there hasn't. It's a very politically charged area to create legislation to restrict social media or to bring penalties to social media companies for not doing something about taking down hateful content online. I know that we do have currently a bill in place, and again, it's a very politically charged bill to place restrictions on social media giants on the circulation of on hateful content. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of will on the part of social media companies to do something about it, even though the solutions could be very technology driven, and we already have the technology, the AI, everything that is required to curb significantly the amount of hate content that is circulating online. But we don't have any penalties. We don't have um, any fines for social media companies to not do that work. We don't have any solid legislation right now that penalizes social media companies to take responsibility to take down hate related content. So until they are their feet are put to the fire in terms of doing something about it, they're not going to. So definitely, it's a big concern for our communities.
Thank you very much. Mariam, there's an interesting question here. How can we bring more awareness and knowledge to the Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights? Information as a right was mentioned, but survivors have to be aware of it. Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this year actually marks the 10-year anniversary of the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights. It came into force in 2015, and it was a great first step. First time where victims are provided with statutory rights within the law. The problem is, like mentioned, is the awareness of it, right? Like even if I ask maybe the panel, like, who has heard about this or has interacted with this, like probably I'd be surprised if everybody said yes. And the issue that's there is that someone within, when it comes especially to that right to information, someone within the system needs to take responsibility at the outset to provide victims and clearly explain them with what their rights are and how they can access it. So I would encourage folks to to visit our website. I'll do a plug there. We will be releasing a lot of materials in the upcoming months to celebrate the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights and to raise awareness of it. The more people speak about it, the better. And in regards to, like you have to be aware in order to access that. That is something where, in order to strengthen and to make it more enforceable, we would like to see the right to information be automatic. It's a recommendation that this office has made many, many times. The wording that's there right now is that victims have the right to information upon request, but in order to know, you have to be able to access it. You need to know to request it. And personally, when joining this office about 4 years ago and learning about the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights and whatnot, I told myself like, wow, like victims can access all of these things, or victims, there's these different supports that are available for victims of homicide, let's say, but nobody in my community is accessing these supports. Nobody in my community is knows that they have the right to register as a victim, and my community is facing high rates of homicide. So where is that gap? So as long as there's these rights are not enforceable, and the right to information is not automatic, and there's not awareness, it's a systemic barrier, and it actually leads to like systemic racism actually, when we look at the data further along. So I challenge everybody to just mention the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights to somebody that they know, and that's how we can raise awareness of it. And you can contact our office as well.
I think there's another question here, perhaps for Alaska. An interesting question. Could the police, community services, and legal services have town halls in various community centers or radio public information to inform how to respond to or report hate crimes? People don't know what to do until things escalate. I think the author of that question is raising an interesting point. Bernie, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I drew attention to this matter at the very beginning of our symposium here, that people really don't know what to expect. And listen, it's a scary proposition to have to walk into a police station and to report, especially to people who've never had that kind of experience before. So yes, I think that there has to be ongoing training. But again, where do the resources come from? Where does the money come from? Can I say to those listening and participating in this symposium today, we have a federal election coming up. We just had a provincial election. It would have been a really good time to start questioning those running for political office. But we have a federal election coming up. And I think it was Samia or one of the others that had noted that online hate, for example, there was a bill that was actually before Parliament. I was involved in helping to prepare this piece of legislation. It took almost a year to get it before Parliament, and then boom, what happens? Of course, Parliament gets dissolved, and the bill is is going to put to rest and never sees the light of day. I think that those of us here ask questions, but start questioning those who want to run for public office. What are they going to do about hate? And get an answer, a straightforward answer. I will bet you that most people who go to town halls or who go to political meetings of this type, these questions rarely come up. And so, yeah, it's good to ask questions here. It's better to actually confront political leaders and demand their time and demand their action.
Craig, do you have any comment on that point?
Well, you know what? When it comes to the police agency, they have an equity, diversity, and inclusion person. Most of them have a section for this. I know in our region, I know that that equity, diversity, and inclusion person is actually getting out to the communities and having these conversations in the town hall meetings. I know that's happening. That is just needs to be a push from the community to start having this as well, and from the police to start taking this seriously, actually offer this whole service the whole way through. So if you're not doing it, they should be doing it. They should be getting to the town halls and working. And I keep saying community partnerships. You need to have community partnerships. We want to come to your community and let you know what we're doing and have some ideas on how you think we should do this. Let's work together to do this. So yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a question, but it's a great point. This needs to be done. This needs to have that side of getting that information out there. It's all part of education. The other thing that should be part of this should be a huge cross Canada hate campaign. So a zero tolerance policy on hate. What do you do? Your experience hate. How do you report hate? Where do you go? This should be a cross Canada campaign that lets people know that we are taking this serious, and there's a zero tolerance policy for it, and this is how you report it in websites that can provide you more information if you want to look yourself. Um, that's my thoughts on it, and I'll leave it at that if somebody else wants to comment.
I'm going to leave it at that. It has been an incredible discussion that leaves with a lot of things to consider going forward. I'd like to let everyone watching know that we'll be sending out a recording of the webcast in about 2 weeks to everyone who registered, and urge everyone to watch the QR code to launch the survey coming in just a few minutes. Thanks to all of the participants, all of you, Craig, Bernie, Mariam, Samra, thanks very much. And on behalf of the Globe and Mail, I'd like to recognize the Canadian Race Relations Foundation for making today's event possible. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mohammed Hashim, the CEO and Executive Director with the foundation, who is going to summarize this discussion.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you to the participants, and thank you to Bob, of course, for being here and setting us up in the right way. It was a very insightful and thought-provoking discussion, and it's a huge thank you to all the participants for and the people who are joining over the webinar who've asked very important questions. I'm going to actually try to answer some of the questions that you've asked there. But Ian, you had started off when you said that hate crimes numbers have been going up every year by year. And that is true for a number of factors. One, yes, I agree, intolerance and hate are growing up, are going up every single year. But I also think that um, there's more to it than simply that. You know, Craig talked about how when he started a hate crimes unit, he got lots of supports from everybody, but he forgot to brag that in his first year, he took hate crimes and incidences from 18 to 286 in 1 year. So some of the numbers that you see from police reported hate crimes are not simply just because hate is going up. It's because hate crimes units are doing more. Of the 178 different police of jurisdiction, according to the report that came from the Federal Ombudsperson of Victims of Crime that Miriam co-authored. Roughly of 178, 31 of them have dedicated hate crimes units. That number has increased from 20 in 2021. So about a 50% increase in hate crimes units and more police being able to work on hate crimes. There was a question around consistency of policing and training on it. And I can tell you it's completely inconsistent across this country. Each police do it differently. Um, and um, and that like whether they do it online, what Craig talked about was like the gold standard where you go in there, you talk to people face to face, and you inform both frontline officers and call intake people on A, how to identify, but B, also how to respond with empathy. That's like the gold standard of the training. Most people are getting trained online through the CPKN, Canadian Police Knowledge Network, online courses that we designed with the RCMP. So we know that the usage of that stuff is happening over there. So there's massive inconsistency. And Miriam and Samia both had mentioned what victims' journeys look like. And you know, whether you're a victim of hate or domestic violence or impaired driving, you know, the journey of a victim is incredibly brutally hard. And you know, I agree with Maria. It's sometimes very difficult for us to recommend people to go to report to police because we know that that experience is going to be challenging. Unless I can call somebody and say, here's Karen from the police who's going to call you, like, and give you a response. Like that happens because I have access to police and I can call people across this country for to get people supports. But otherwise, like if you're going in knocking on a door, like chances are likely people are not going to treat um like the case with a significant degree of seriousness. But I do think that, you know, as Bernie said, you know, like there is significant needs for both collaboration of crowns and police to be able to work better. And part of the work that we're doing at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and it's important to note that the federal government has been working on this for a number of years, and Minister Cara and Minister LeBlanc, when he was a public safety minister, and my minister, Minister Cara, Diversity, Inclusion, and Disabilities, jointly released Canada's Action Plan on Combating Hate, which included funds for better police training, for victims of hate supports, which needed, but the provision of victims of hate supports comes from provinces, and it's a provincial jurisdiction. So the government provided funds for matching funds if provinces were to step up and want to do so. I know uptake for that fund is minimal, but we're hoping more provinces are going to have access to those funds, but also for community organizations who want to do third-party reporting, because we recognize that sometimes assisting victims, as both Miriam and Samia had said, is actually better from a community organization because the focus is on healing versus anything else. And I think that that's really, really, really important. Also, there's been funding made available for synagogues and churches and mosques and temples and gurdwaras to get both security equipment and security guards. So there's like this, it's not like the federal government is unaware of all these different things and has been responding and creating opportunities to do so. It's important to say so. But the last thing I'm gonna just end on is that, look, I think that right now there is a lot of anxiety in the world, particularly now, but there's also a resurgence of unifying under the flag. And I think that, for me at least, I grew up at a time in the 70s and 80s where, there was racism was rife, but I also lived across the street from a chain smoking Irish woman named Gertie who looked after me every day after school because my mom was at school or working. So, and to be frank, I think Gertie loved me more than her own kids. Uh, so like I think that like being neighbors and being good to each other and investing in kindness and looking at at each other and opportunities to do better for is the Canada that I want to rally around. And like this is an opportunity when we are defining what being Canadian means again. And to be frank, I have seen, as in this job, the devastating impacts of policy that Canada has created to First Nations communities, to Inuit communities, to Métis communities, to racialized communities across these lands, from coast to coast to coast. But I still believe that this is an evolving project, and that I am a part of this evolving project, as are you, and that the responsibility of what comes tomorrow and what came before falls upon me and you. And if we're going to fight for a Canada, let's acknowledge the past, but make sure the future moves us forward in a direction where all of us are proud to be calling ourselves Canadians. And with that, I'll just say that's my call for today.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. We'll turn it over to Bob for the closing ceremony. Thank you.
Yeah, Miigwech and Yawagoa. Thank you, merci to all the speakers and those that have come together in community to listen and to learn and to share. I think this was a really important event. Thank the Globe and Mail for their leadership and all the participants. And I just think about the incredible pressure put on all of the folks that are here as speakers and their families and their communities, and just really ask Creator to send blessings to each and every one of you, and to help you in this really tough work that you're doing, and to keep that hope that's so desperately needed, to keep that hope really strong. I was overwhelmed and hearing some of the things that I heard, but so pleased that I was able to do that. So in our tradition, we don't say goodbye. We say see you soon, or take care, or be well, safe travels. And so I say that to all of you. Have good journeys. I've kept this fire going here, and we'll just think about that we've come around that fire in community. And just like I said at the start, think about that fire as a place that's a unifying place that we can all sit around in community. But significantly, for those things that don't serve us well, ask the fire to help take care of that for you. Because there's so many burdens that so many of us end up carrying, and we don't need to. So think about that fire to help you with those burdens. And so many blessings to all of you. And so happy that ceremony was part of this, because ceremony, in my view, is a big part of the answer in terms of how we deal with these some of the terrible works that are going on in our country, and how we create that great future for our children and grandchildren and the next 7 generations. So with that, I just say Chimigwech and Yabagoa, and we'll see you all soon. Safe travels, everyone.
Miigwech.
Miigwech.